you bring up, there's really three denominations that I have an actual like issue with. And you just brought up the third one. First one, Roman Catholics, obviously. Second one, Eastern Orthodox, for the fact that they deny the filioque and they limit the power of Jesus so much. And the third one here, the Pentecostals. War Chief Valhalla says, I have scars on my face from when I was 14 from a Pentecostal preacher. That is terrible to hear. Like, now here's the thing. I was in a Pentecostal church for years. An ex of mine kind of drugged me there. If we're going to be honest, I was not spiritually fed by what I saw there. And the problem is the charismatic movement. There are wonderful people from the charismatic movement. So don't think I'm speaking in such a broad brush that I'm putting every person in the entire Pentecostal or charismatic movement in one broad brush. But I've noticed the Pentecostals tend to be a bit more guilty of this, where some Pentecostals believe you have to speak tongues in order to be saved. There's nothing in the Bible that states that at all. That is just something they've whole cloth made up on themselves. I'm one of those people that will go to bat for the idea of salvation by faith alone. That your salvation is by faith alone. Now, people talk about whether your justification is by faith alone or not. That's a different story. But the Pentecostals, I've noticed, like, when the requirement is you must speak the tongues in order to be saved, there's this really big temptation to fake it and to just like act like you spoke the tongues. And I can only imagine why a preacher of the Pentecostal persuasion would put a scar on a child's face. I can about imagine, like, because the charismatics, okay, the charismatics are a bit out there. Okay, like they're willing to do some stuff that's kind of, now the charismatic movement comes from the Methodist Church. So the Methodists were kind of the grandfathers of all this. Now, I have a lot of love for the Methodist Church, despite what they did a few weeks ago, which that's what the United Methodist Church did is, ugh. But the Methodist Church, my grandmother played the organ for a Methodist church here in Nebraska for 50 years. Her sister played the organ. They did a newspaper article about it. It played the organ for a Methodist church in Kansas for 60 years. Okay, so on my father's side, Methodists runs deep, and so it really breaks my heart to see where they send it. Now, War Chief says something very interesting. Religion is what Jesus was against. And that's why I'm going to read for you right now my favorite biblical verse. Okay. This is a reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, verses 6 through 11. And this is exactly what you're talking about. And so, I was raised with something called sacred tradition. So these verses feel like a good, proper scolding for a Catholic. This, I can about imagine how it's going to hit you. But when you talk about Jesus was against like religion, listen to this. A reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, verses 6 through 11. So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God, you hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. And he called the people to him, and he said to them, hear and understand. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a person. Thus ends the reading of God's holy word. So what you had to deal with was people teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Yeah. And these were people who, that for the sake of their tradition or what they deemed to be tradition, they made void the word of God. And so you always have to be careful of that. Now I'm going to get to, but all right. War Chief says he hit me with a Bible. He had a cross chain as a bookmark and it put scar down the right side of my face. I can only about imagine. I love that verse. Thank you. Now we're going to get into this comment here. War Chief, I ran so far into the devil's arms that evil wasn't even a thought. But when he sent one person into my life, that it had me running. His was surely on faith and faith alone, no religion. Okay, now I get you. Now I for a second took me a moment to yeah, when that true conversion moment comes and it hits you, there's very little that can be done because God never calls upon someone who is 100% completely qualified, but he always qualifies the call. So always remember that. Now, even you, war chief, whether you're aware of it or not, you will be spreading the word of the Lord to people throughout your life. Uh, no, that's fine. That's fine, man. I enjoy the fact that the audience can kind of chill out. Okay, like that's what I prefer. Okay, there's times during Sunday night Bible study I will even have a libation or two. I know, hard to believe. I'm just not getting into it tonight. I just not feeling it. You know what I mean? Like there's some nights I want to, but I don't know. I just kind of felt like some sweet tea on the rocks tonight.